All right, let's get started, everyone. Hello and welcome to this session that is called Taking Action in Times of Crises. This one is all about how NGOs and international organizations work together with the private and public sectors to come up with solutions to our most pressing crises of the time. In around 20 minutes, I'll be chatting with representatives from Actionable and the French Red Cross, who are working together to find data solutions to some emergencies that are happening in the world. We'll also be talking to the executive director of a social enterprise that's training rats to save lives. But first, I do have the pleasure to welcome two UN veterans. Luc Chauvin joins me on stage. He is the Chief of Humanitarian Partnerships at UNICEF. And virtually, Aggie Veres joins me as well. She's the director of the UNDP in Geneva. Let's give them a round of applause. So, the UN is, of course, a huge network of specialized agencies, programs, funds, bodies. And this afternoon, we're going to have a discussion about how these different moving parts come together and work with the private and public sectors to respond to crises. Pas de jingle, no. Let's start right ahead. So with Luc, my first question is for you. As the Chief of Humanitarian Partnerships, what does your role entail? And could you give us an example of a recent project you've worked on?
Sure, thanks, Yena. Well, actually, I'm based in Geneva. I came today for this meeting. What we mean by humanitarian partnerships is, of course, UNICEF or UNDP. We cannot work alone, in situations of crisis. We need to work with local governments, NGOs, the private sector, and therefore my role as the Chief of Humanitarian Partnerships is that I lead a small team of colleagues precisely to develop these kind of partnerships with other big UN agencies, with the Red Cross, NGOs, and the private sector.
And Aggie, thank you for joining us from Geneva. The UNDP obviously strives to eradicate poverty and encourage sustainable development. What is the role of the program in crisis settings, and how does it do collaboration with humanitarian agencies?
Well, we work in 170 countries and territories around the world, but out of these, 60% of our program is in crisis settings. So our goal, why we are not a humanitarian agency per se, is to make sure that we support adaptable responses that lay the foundation for sustainable development. In other words, we need to go hand in hand with humanitarian response, which is about the most basic needs of people, but coupling it with other basic needs such as healthcare services, or setting up basic functions of a community, just like we did in Afghanistan. So essentially, we are there to make sure that even in the first phase of a crisis, there is a footprint that would allow people to start building their resilience and to cater to their basic human needs and get the basic services that any community would require.
And Aggie, could you give us some concrete examples of collaborative approaches that the UNDP has been doing, whether it's with international or local communities or private or public sectors?
Sure. For example, in Afghanistan, this is a crisis that, of course, everybody knows. We are working together with the other 15 UN agencies to support the socioeconomic recovery of the country. Specifically, what this needs, we are trying to support to complement the humanitarian response by having catering to basic human needs and also rebuilding the people's economy. So specifically what this means is that we would not just give cash for work like we usually or regularly do in crisis situations, but also for cash for markets. So people can develop their small markets that helps this community level economy to revive while maybe a national economy cannot happen. We also partnered with the Global Fund, for example, and other health agencies to deliver health services and to the very essential needs in Afghanistan.
And Luc, aside from governments and international organizations, what are perhaps some of the more unexpected partnerships that you've worked on?
I think some of the more promising partnerships are actually with the private sector. and because we need the expertise of private companies that we don't have inside the UN system. So in UNICEF, we have experts, in water and sanitation, in nutrition, in education, in protection issues. But in many contexts now, we realize that we need outside expertise. So what we're trying to do in UNICEF is really to get agreements with private sector companies so that they can bring pro bono expertise to us. And if I can give you a couple of examples, for example, we have a partnership with Veolia, which is a big French utility, and that we have used a couple of times recently after the bomb, the detonation at the harbor in Beirut just a couple of years back. And they sent a team of 6 experts for a month-long mission to UNICEF just to do a diagnosis of the damages to the water systems, and then to come up with actionable recommendations to local authorities. And this was extremely appreciated, both by local authorities in Lebanon, by the team over there. We had also a similar type of support from Veolia for Equatorial Guinea, where again they brought their own experts. So I think this is kind of the win-win agreements that we're looking forward to, and I hope that this occasion being here today will allow us to promote this kind of partnership with private sector companies.
And there are so many crises to respond to right now. You mentioned the crisis in Lebanon, but of course Afghanistan, as Aggie said, Ukraine, there's just so many challenges. Tell us a bit more about the humanitarian sector today.
Yeah, I mean, as we all know, I mean, the number and intensity of humanitarian crises are just increasing. If I take my own, you were saying that I'm a kind of old-timer of the UN, but when I started working for UNICEF in 1994 after the genocide in Rwanda, this was the biggest operations of UNICEF in the world, and we had a $50 million annual budget. And the total ask for humanitarian financing at that time from UNICEF was $500 million. This year, our ask for funding for the humanitarian sector is $10 billion.
Wow.
So it has expanded 20 times. So today, our humanitarian actions is 159 countries. I checked the facts. Our appeal, our humanitarian, so appeal is for $10 billion for the year. A big chunk of that is actually for Afghanistan, where basically the state functions are not covered. So it's to provide health, education, services, working with the UN and NGO partners. So the trend is not good. And when we look ahead, we know that we're going to have more crises compounded by climate change, displacement, conflict. 80% of the crises now that we have to respond to are actually man-made crisis, protracted crisis, etc., such as Afghanistan, Ukraine. So I think this is where we need to really pull our efforts together, because the UN is not able on its own to do the work. So we need the NGOs, we need the local NGOs, we need the private sector, and of course in support of government efforts.
You were just mentioning they're pulling our efforts together. The UNDP works extensively also with the private sector and the finance community. Aggie, how can finance help achieve the SDGs in vulnerable settings, and what more can be done?
I mean, we all know that, as Luke said, that financing and funding is an issue because as the humanitarian needs are expanding, the budgets don't necessarily expand from the public sector. So maybe just before I answer your question on the finance sector, link it to what Luke was saying before. This is why we also need to look at 2 aspects. One is how do we engage with more financing, but also what is really our approach to this humanitarian crisis? Because as we see the funding envelope growing and growing, that's not a sustainable model. So we also need to look at our own collective response mechanism to see, what can we do differently? And one of the things that we, from UNDP's perspective, are advocating for is that we really need to look at the connection between humanitarian development and peace actions, because humanitarian actions cannot be sustained in the long run at this cost and at this pace with all the crises around the world. And we already see that, other crises that are out there have not been resolved, yet the resources are now going to the new crisis. So we need to look at that as well, not just the financing, to see how we can build resilience, how we can build peace and avoid some of the needs, the basic needs for the humanitarian assistance, and address them other ways. Now, the second aspect, of course, is the financing part. And the financing needs have increased in developing countries, both because of COVID, but also because of the unfolding crisis. And only 20% of global capital is held in developing countries, which represent 84% of the world's population. So there is a big gap here that we need to work, and we need to work with the private sector. It is estimated that if we look at this financing, we could unlock about 12 trillion in US dollars in market opportunities for the private sector. So this means that it unleashes innovation, economic growth, development. So when we talk about private sector financing, it's not necessarily about getting the funds from the private sector to address this humanitarian crisis, but to engage them so that they can help create the markets, they can help with the employment generation and so forth, while at the same time also in their own practices integrating more and more on the sustainable development principles. So specifically what this means is working with SMEs, social enterprises in developing countries is a fundamental part of the economic fabric, and they play a crucial role in furthering growth, innovation, and prosperity. And they represent about 90% of businesses and more than 50% of employment worldwide. So the formal SMEs contribute up to 40% of national incomes in emerging economies worldwide. So there's a huge opportunity to connect these enterprises with further investments. So we need to look at how we can create this link. And we as UNDP, what we're trying to do is create a link as a platform between sustainable investments, the investment opportunities on the ground that can address the humanitarian development issues in crisis situations, and investors' interest to expand their markets. It's very challenging, though, because, of course, private sector has different motivations, but at the same time, there are already good usable models that we can look at how to expand on this.
Very interesting. Sustainable investment, definitely something to tap into. And Luke, you mentioned earlier pro bono possibilities with the private sector. When you work with the private sector, how does it happen? Like what kind of partnerships do you create?
Well, we have a mechanism within UNICEF that exists also in other agencies, which is really to grab this expertise from other institutions. So we have agreements with big government institutions like the Swedish Civil Contingency Planning Agency, but also with NGOs. Okay, and now what we're trying to get is also to have these kind of agreements whereby private sector companies interested in providing pro bono technical expertise to us to respond to emergencies can come in, can have a dialogue, etc. So it's a bit of an appeal here. There are private sector companies or startups who are interested in working with UNICEF in the field because, as I said, right now 70% of our expenditures actually go to humanitarian crisis. Therefore, we need their help. We need their expertise. Artificial intelligence, digital imagery, strategic management. We had a few very good examples, like in Mozambique, also after the cyclone there 2 years back, where we had a similar type of approach with a big consulting company. So this is what we are looking at, because I think it's really win-win. I think it's an opportunity for private sector companies also to give a different angle to their staff, to do something good, to go out there, work in the field, and help the teams. And for us, it's great. I mean, we get new ideas. We bring in new people on board for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, etc. So, yeah, that's what we're trying to expand right now.
It's an appeal to anyone who's listening. Aggie, a bit of a personal question now. You've worked in Eastern Europe and Asia, in Africa, and you also have a background in the private sector. How has your work experience helped you in your later roles?
I think the experience of being at the field level in very different settings, from Southern Africa to China, it gives you a perspective of understanding the development needs of the least developed countries, but also the opportunities of innovation and technology that's available in other countries. And also makes you realize how a lot of times these things are not necessarily connected. So while there may be a lot of solutions existing in Asia, for example, to the problems of Africa, a lot of the times the solutions don't find the problems, or the other way, the development problems don't find the solutions. So I think, this for us as development professionals really is a motivator and a driver to see how can we facilitate the world global knowledge and experience to essentially create global public goods and contribute to the development of the countries that are most needing it. So now in my role in Geneva, where I'm focusing very much on partnerships, similarly to Luke, it's really to see what is the value added for a development agency, not just on the ground in implementing projects, but really using this global understanding of the development of various development levels of countries, and to see how we can create something that is beneficial for the countries that could receive more assistance, the countries who are ready to go out to market, and to the private sector who want to engage more. So I think this role is what drives me, and contributes to something new that the UN agency can do beyond our traditional or stereotypical mandate.
And you, Luke, you're also based in Geneva after decades of field experience. So same question to you.
I think I would encourage the participants today to work in the humanitarian sector, because there are great needs out there, and we need more people who are ready to take that journey. If they're coming from the private sector, that's great. They can bring also their own experience, but it's a bit also of an appeal there that I find it's difficult now to get, I would say, younger people ready to go out there in the field, because the conditions have also deteriorated. It's not like it used to be 20 or 30 years back. In many countries, it's actually quite dangerous. Security issues. You can live in bunkerized compounds. Access to local population is difficult. But I think we need more humanitarians to go out there and do the work.
All right, thank you so much, Luc, Chauvin, and Aguiveras, for speaking to us today. Very interesting stuff there about global public good, about partnerships, about collaborations. The possibilities are abound. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you go back to your seat. It's up there. All right, let's zoom in now on a concrete example of how to use data in times of crises. And for that, I can welcome Axelle, Lemaire, and Gwendal Bihan to the stage. She is the Deputy Director of the French Red Cross, and he is the CEO of Actionable, a data consulting firm that is dedicated to sustainable and responsible AI. They're working on a collaborative project together, and they're here to tell us all about it. So let's start with you, Gwendal, actually. What are you working on with the Red Cross?
Yeah, thank you, Yena, and thank you, ChangeNOW, for inviting us. Actionable, we are a B Corp company, and we use data and AI for sustainable goals. And we started working with Red Cross 1 year ago, first to just scope what we can do with data to help the organization in their mission. And when the Ukrainian crisis appeared 3 months ago, then we decided together with Axelle to enter in a more concrete approach of data, assuming that the Red Cross is fully mobilized in hosting refugees. And after a few weeks of operations, Axelle and Red Cross had the idea of setting up a data and tech task force just to help the volunteers and the organization do their work, I would say, better, to better understand what are the needs in terms of hosting, translation, healthcare, etc. And so concretely, we use data from the different operational centers of Red Cross to just give insights to the organization, to the volunteers, to better and to optimize how it works.
So could you tell us just an example of what you're doing with the Red Cross in Ukraine?
Yeah, so basically, we provide, I would say, dashboards. It's quite basics, but it helps to really understand just what is the language that people speak. Of course, they know, but there are some Excel spreadsheets here. There are some maybe applications there. And so we gather all this, and then we give a simple and robust information to the team that it can just react. OK, I need a translator here. OK, the hosting needs to be like that.
All right, and Axelle, you're of course the French Minister of Digital Affairs. With your background, how do you think data can help in solving humanitarian crises?
A few years ago, when I was a member of the French government, we launched through the digital bill for Digital Republic a principle which was all about open data by default, right? And now I'm realizing that this principle helps in gathering, collecting, crossing databases when it comes to achieving sustainable goals. When it comes to the humanitarian sector, that's another story, right? And we're lagging a little behind, especially when it comes to understanding the flows of refugees. So typically in the Ukraine war, I realized how challenging it was to understand where the people were, in which country, in which city, and also how challenging it was to exchange data between organizations, be it the European Commission's, national states, or NGOs and associations working on the ground. And without this data, our actions are not as efficient as they could be. Therefore, this is why at the national level, right, in France, we had to deal with a flow of 70,000 people fleeing Ukraine, arriving within a short lapse of time, 2 months. And so in order to better understand their needs, in the private sector, we say, know your customer. Well, in the humanitarian sector, we say, know your beneficiaries. And so we needed to understand what they needed. And we launched a website called Croix Rouge Bonjour. So it's hello, good morning, Croix Rouge, Red Cross, right? And with a column on if you need help, this is where you can find information. And we realized through data analytics that the #1 need was all about food. And we were very surprised about that. We were like, when they arrive at the train station in Paris, are they looking for food? Well, yes. And the #2 item that was the most requested was an internet connection and a smartphone, so electronic device. So that's, hence the usefulness of getting that data analytics, because we can then evolve in the way we respond to the real needs. There's also another challenge which is super important, which is transparency and accountability. We need to report back, especially when we collect huge amount of money from the private sector, companies that have been very generous, and private individuals, on our actions, and be able to explain exactly how the money was used. But how do you report back on initiatives taken at the micro level by a few bunch of volunteers in the southwest of France? Well, through data. And so we need to have ergonomic tools and easy ways to collect that data in real time in very easy ways for the volunteers, because they didn't join the Red Cross to report back using data, right?
Super interesting about how useful data can be in these settings, and also the limits of it. And Gwendal, what are some other difficulties when it comes to using data in emergency settings?
I would say communication and an organization. First, communication. We are data experts, we are consultants, and when working with Croix Rouge and with the volunteers, we have really to avoid any jargon, because we have people coming from very diverse backgrounds. We have people that are not data experts. So the communication has really to be a bit different than in other sector. And then organization is also specific. First, working with volunteers, you have to be prepared that volunteers can just jump in and jump off, because they can have, I don't know, maybe 1 month they can help, but after they will have maybe other duties. And so in terms of project organizations, it means just simple stuff like documentation, just to make sure that it's not in the head of one volunteer. And of course, in terms of acting in times of crisis, when it comes to tech, you cannot afford any R&D period. You have to use what the tech is available right now. And also in terms of organization, you cannot make any compromise. So it has to be available, it has to be quick, but it cannot be dirty. I mean, you cannot make any compromise on privacy or cybersecurity when you work with data about refugees. Assuming in the Ukrainian crisis, there's also this threat from Russia. And so, yeah, it's a bunch of constraints that you have to really take into account to make, I would say, to adapt really on the ground the project organization, to use what is available, to document, and yeah, and so far I would say it works. It will be a long road, but we have already some very good first insights.
There definitely is a fine balance to be found between rapid, safe, and useful, efficient solutions. Axelle, could you give us an example of an innovative idea that had to be scrapped?
Yes, oh, many. But one recent example is we wanted to launch an NFT campaign. There was this Dutch trendy artist who turned to us and said, you know, he just had the cover of Wire magazine, and he said, I'm going to give you a few artwork pieces for you to use as NFTs. And I was like super excited. And then I turned to my governance, and an association like the Red Cross is governed by the volunteers, right? They're elected representatives at all levels, local, regional, and national. So we're also accountable as executive directors towards them. And they said, what's the environmental impact? I was like, oh, I don't know. What's the ethical impact? Oh, I don't know. Are you sure you can track down who the donors will be? Because they won't buy the NFT, right? They will buy it for free. But still, we do have financial obligations to be able to individualize the donations. And I was like, oof, I don't know. And so we that was actually a good opportunity to start digging into the topic. And we will be ready for next time to answer these questions. But we didn't do it, you know, in addressing the Ukrainian crisis.
Well, thank you for that very sharing moment of a very interesting example there. There is this cliche, though, that French institutions and NGOs included, they can be a bit reluctant to seek innovative or tech solutions. What needs to be done to break down some of these barriers? Axelle, you can go first.
I hate cliches. They're the most difficult thing to break down, right? I mean, of course, humanitarian organizations are keen to innovate. The only reason why they don't is resources. Hence, the help given by a company like Actionable and the help of Gwendal. Why is that? That's the perfect exemplary collaboration. That's exactly what we need. Very large groups turned to us saying, oh, we'll provide staff on loan for one day, 40 people, and they will like the experience. I were like, no, please, no, we don't have the time and money to manage these people. But then Gwendal said, you'll have a full team, staff on loan, dealing with your data challenges for 3 months, pro bono. I was like, oh, thank you so much. And so this is exactly the type of collaboration that we need. And what I do realize is that beyond financial partnerships, this is not to say that financial collaboration is not important, because this is how we fund our actions. But beyond that, increasingly, we're co-building new services. We're conceiving our new social offerings with our partners. Let me give you an example. We realized that the signage of the train stations for people arriving in Gare du Nord wasn't good. And so a design studio helped us design specific signs for the Ukrainians. That was pro bono, and that's building a new way to address the crisis, right? So and increasingly we'll be looking to co-build our answers together.
Co-building, a key aspect then for the Red Cross. Gwendal, going back to this idea that tech solutions are often very hard or difficult for NGOs in the humanitarian sector, what do you think? Do you think there are barriers that need to be broken down?
Yeah, in my view, it's all a question about culture. And what I mean behind is that I think in large institution, in NGO, indeed, there is sometimes a lack of investment. There are some great stuff that are done, but the lack of just understanding from some of the leadership, just understand what we mean by technology, what we mean by AI, what we mean by NFT. And so the solution behind is training. And of course, the objective is not that the executive of Red Cross or UNICEF become data scientists. That's not my point. But just that they have the understanding of concrete example of how data and analytics can help in concrete responses in humanitarian crisis. And I think the root cause is always on culture, on training, and so we need more training, and this is also true in corporations, but it's also true, in my view, in NGO and institutions. So more training.
More training. And
more tech training. Yep.
Why is it important for a company like yours, Actionable, to work with the Red Cross? What does it bring you?
Sense at work, I think. I think the average age of my team is something between 25 and 30. I'm the veteran. I'm 39. And so, of course, it can sound like a cliche, but my team, they are most of them activists, and they want to have sense. And of course, when you set up a team working on the Ukrainian crisis together with Red Cross, we have concrete impact. And as I mentioned earlier, we are a company. Also, we are a responsible company. We are B Corp. At some day, I need to make profit if I want my company to remain sustainable. And I think there is a link between sense at work and profitability. And it's not a nonsense to say that people who are more engaged, who find sense, they will stay longer in a company, they will be more performant, and at the end of the day, the company will be more profitable. And this is a strategy that we have. And in the NGO sector, we have to be open-minded in terms of innovation, because discussing together with Axelle, we were fully convinced that the data task force using data and analytics would be a great idea, but we know that it could take maybe 2-3 months just to have the validation of the budget, blah, blah, blah. And so this is sometimes you just need, as an entrepreneur, as an executive, to say, okay, let's do it pro bono, and we'll see later on, and we'll find other way to monetize at the end of the day.
Very good here. See how he's trying to negotiate a new contract with us.
On the spot. And Axelle, what do you think about what he's been saying about how it can be meaningful for private sector to join forces? Do you think it's a win-win situation?
Oh, clearly. And I see that on a daily basis, especially when dealing with technology companies, because the job market in the sector is under huge tension. So talent attractiveness is their #1 challenge. So when their missions take special meaning, and they know why they wake up in the morning to go to work, that really is an add-on to their job. And so and this is good for the humanitarian sector, and another encouragement for going into that direction, because we know that many young talents are attracted if we use the right technologies and culture to attract them. So it really is a win-win situation.
And Gwendal, what other projects is Actionable working on right now? Is there anything else that could be related to humanitarian crises?
I think today we are all sweating, and it's just the beginning. And we are sweating in Paris, but Unfortunately, people are dying in India and Pakistan. And so one of the major projects that we're working on right now is to predict how intense and frequent will heat waves be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, based on IPCC data. It's quite scaring, actually. But science is very clear, data is available, and we work a lot at the moment with energy sector, with insurance, to be able to have the proper investment now to change the game and be prepared to reduce the carbon footprint. And I definitely see a link between climate changes and climate change impact and the humanitarian sector. As it has been said, there will be climate refugees. We know also that there will be more pandemic due to climate change. And so I think there is also here a large room for hybrid collaboration between the private sector, between academics that need to, science need of course to be part of the answer, and humanitarian organizations like Red Cross, like UNICEF. So this is one of the biggest topics that we address, and I think for a while, and I would say unfortunately. Yeah.
Absolutely. Axelle, could you briefly tell us about other examples of these hybrid collaborations that the Red Cross is doing?
Yeah. Just to follow up on what Gwendal was saying, we do notice already how humanitarian crises are increasing in intensity and volume, and this is directly linked to climate change. And it means a lot for humanitarian organizations themselves, because they have to adapt and become in a state of permanent emergencies or permanent crisis, if I may say so. What it means for innovation and the use of technologies, well, that they have to be used constantly to help transform the organizations. And so I'll give you another concrete example. We've launched a program called Entrepreneur in Residence, and there will be a few individuals hired to launch new products and new services to address new social needs that come out of these new humanitarian crises. So we know that climate change will have an impact on the flow of refugees across the world, and that the question of cash transfer is key to be able to follow them and address their most urgent needs. So, for example, the Ukrainians arriving in Paris, they could immediately or pretty quickly get their visa access, right? They were allowed to stay, but they were not given any financial allowance because of administrative reasons. So we, as the Red Cross, wanted to advance some cash and be able to make cash transfers. This is a sector that is highly regulated. It is complicated, and digital technologies can help in providing the solutions. So these entrepreneurs in residence will create new products to be able to transfer cash to refugees. That's just one example amongst others, but it says a lot about the need for humanitarian organizations to adapt continuously to these new situations.
All right, thank you so much for those concrete examples. Gwendal, Bihan and Axelle, Lemaire, they were talking to us there about their collaborative projects. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us.
Thank you.
So from collaboration to innovation, now we're going to have our last guest for the session. She's going to join us virtually, though. She is in Switzerland. She is Yena Bouchier, the executive director of a social enterprise called Apopo. Apopo is a non-profit that trains rats to save lives. The little heroes can actually detect landmines and tuberculosis. So I'm sure you're all curious to know how that all works.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone.
Hello, Anna. You're joining me remotely. First, tell us about these rats. How do they sniff out deadly mines and tuberculosis?
So, I mean, they sniff out tuberculosis and landmines because they have an amazing sense of smell. I think that's the basis of what we do. So we train giant African patch rats, so a rather large rodent which is endemic of sub-Saharan Africa. We train them from Tanzania in a city called Morogoro. And we use to train them operant conditioning techniques and more specifically positive reinforcement. What it means is that for about 9 months, we're going to train the rats to use this amazing sense of smell to recognize the target smell, either landmines or tuberculosis. And we train them to associate this smell with food. So they have a reward if they actually find the right smell. And we use a clicker, which is something that we can use for dog training. Anyone can actually use those. We use a clicker to reinforce the link between the two. And so over the 9 months, basically, the rats are being trained to indicate, to recognize, even to discriminate between this scent and other scents, and to indicate that to the trainers. And when they do, they get food. And it gets increasingly more difficult over the length of the training. And in the end, they have a blind sessions before they can get their accreditation and they can go on into deployment.
Apopo really is a concrete example of taking action in times of crises. The war in Ukraine, of course, reminding us once again that landmines remain an ongoing issue. It's a crisis that we really do see unfolding before our eyes. Anna, tell us about that. How, I mean, it's going to go on for years now.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that landmines are still a problem in more than 60 countries in the world. And even though it's been their use, their production, their exchange, the fact that we cannot stockpile them, anything, it's been forbidden by the Ottawa Treaty from the late 90s. What we see is that they're still being used and they're still being produced. And the danger behind that is that landmines are a danger to the safety of populations. They're actually a danger to the safety of civilian populations. What we see is that half of the victims are actually children and almost 80% are civilians. What it means is that what we see in Ukraine right now, and we have the first numbers coming in from Human Rights Watch, for example, showing that some landmines are being used. It means that it's going to be a legacy of this conflict for years to come, and the victims are going to be the civilians living with those afterwards, even after the conflict will cease. And so having more efficient technologies and innovation to actually detect those landmines is very important, and animals can be a good solution for that.
Well, there are traditional methods of detecting landmines, so those machines that detect metal. How do your Apopo rats compare to this?
I think, yeah, of course. I mean, still the most traditional, the most used way of detecting landmines is the metal detector. So what the metal detector does is it detects, obviously, metal. So it has limitations because of detecting metal in a country after a conflict. Actually, in any field, really, you can have a very large amount of scrap metal. And so you can have a very large amount of false indication that you have to really go and investigate each time, because it could be nothing, but it could be a landmine, and you want to be sure. And so the animals actually are way more cost efficient because they will only stop when they can smell TNT, the actual explosive within landmines. They will not stop for metal. What it means in terms of speed is that they can do in 30 minutes, they can actually screen the size of a tennis court, so about 200 square meters. They can do that in 30 minutes, and that would take up to 4 days to a manual deminer, depending on the level of scrap metal. So they are way quicker.
And can we train them to detect any other problems? Are you working on any other new projects?
We are. I mean, one of the big Apopo mission is also to investigate what other things those amazing creatures can do. And so we're always investigating what are the targets they could actually detect. We have a few projects about other diseases, for example, detection of brucellosis, still in research. We also have a project about wildlife detection. So we're investigating the capacity of the rats to detect pangolin scale, which is the most trafficked mammals in the world. So to prevent the the traffic of these mammals. And we also have applications for a more emergency setting as well. We see that in a fast-changing world and with this environmental crisis coming in, with this increasing number of earthquakes, landslides, you can have more buildings that collapsed. And so we also have an operational research to assess if the rats could actually detect victims who are trapped in a collapsed building. So those rats would actually be equipped with a backpack, a smart backpack with a camera and a microphone, and they could actually go into a collapsed building where no one else could go, even dogs or just technologies, even humans obviously cannot go, cannot access, and the rats can actually go and find the victims trapped, and they can actually indicate with a camera and a GPS tracker, so the trainer will actually see where the rat is and could pin the location of the victim. And they have a microphone to instigate two-way communication. So you could actually be trapped in a building and having a rat with a camera. You could actually talk to the rat, and the rat would transfer that to someone on the outside, and you can actually pin your position and get you out in a timely manner.
Search and rescue rats then. But Apopo doesn't just have these rodents, you also train dogs. So where do all your animals come from, and where are they deployed? Where do they work?
Yes, so we do have dogs which are used in a different way as the rats. Those are Belgian Shepherds, so they're not from Tanzania. They are being bred in Europe and then being sent to Cambodia, where we have a dog training center. And so the dogs are being used a bit differently because they're actually used to assess if a suspected land actually contains landmines. Because they have a tracker instinct and they will go and search the field, and they don't have to look for every mine, they just have to confirm if actually there are landmines there. And if it's confirmed, then you have clearance tools that come in, such as the rats, who are micro-searcher, and they will find every single mine. And so they're being used in combination, those two animals. We have them deployed, all over the world, really, but the rats are deployed in Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Angola, in Tanzania, in Mozambique. We have this operation now in Cambodia, and we also have only dogs operation in South Sudan, in Turkey, and soon in Azerbaijan.
I have to ask you though, animal welfare is of course important. How many rats and dogs are in Apopo's care, and how do you make sure they are taken care of?
We have a few rats now, over the years. We have almost 280. That's not all deployed. That's in various stages of training, even of retirement. Some that we have also in a visitor center in Cambodia. So all of the rats that we have is about 280. And then we have about 40 dogs. Again, various stages of training and deployment, not all of them deployed. So animal welfare is at the core of what we do, because animals are they are the heart of Apopo. So we have a very thorough, strict animal welfare policy in place, which is following the World Organization for Animal Health. What it means is that we have rules for everything in terms of how we keep them in very calm, clean kennels. The rats are nocturnal animals, so we try to respect, their natural instinct, which is to sleep during the day. So it has to be very calm. Only a few people can enter those kennels. We also have a very strict, very studied diet, very diverse, of banana, nuts, mixed of fruits and vegetables. So everything is being really cared for. We have daily care from the trainers. We have daily vet care. Also, obviously, to take care of those rats. We also have even a retirement plan, really, for them. So when they're old and we can really see that they're not as eager to go to work, we actually leave them be, and which is about after 7-8 years when they're getting older. We leave them be, and then they're being retired into the home cage with playtime and everything that they need to actually have happy lives after that. And of course, it's very important to stress that they are too light to set off the landmines, and so they're actually safe detecting landmines, because so that's a very important thing maybe to add.
And Apopo has actually been around for 2 decades now. What's the outcome been? What are your results like? How many landmines have you detected? Where are you at with tuberculosis?
So we've found more than 140,000 landmines and other explosive remnants of wars. We've also helped giving back more than 64 million square meters of land to local population. Those are lands which were unusable before that, before Apopo came in, and that we can give back to local population for anything really, agriculture, infrastructure, growing road, growing vegetables, grazing, anything that you could actually use those land for, and of course for security as well. And this represents roughly 1 million people who are freed from the threat of landmines. For tuberculosis, we have helped detect more than 22,000 people, additional TB patients who were actually missed by conventional microscopy and who were sent to infect their families and friends. And that represents almost 100,000 infections stopped, because tuberculosis is actually very contagious. And if you have it, you can spread it to 10 to 50 people around you.
Wow, some amazing numbers there. Tell us a bit more about Apopo's funding. Who funds you, and do you have any partnerships?
Sure. I mean, the funding is quite diverse within Apopo. We have governmental funding, which helped us tremendously. We have private foundations, private individuals. We do have a lot of individuals, actually, public donations, because we have an adoption program. So people can actually adopt rats. And that actually constitutes quite an income as well. And we do have some leasing revenues from the dogs as well, because we do have partnership with other mine action operators and other big organizations where we actually use the animals and they deploy other resources.
And who do you actually work for? Do governments call in for your help, or do you work for international organizations? How does it function?
So we usually work in partnership with a local mine action authority. So let's take Cambodia, for example, we have the Cambodian Mine Action Authority, which basically Cambodia has signed the Ottawa Treaty, which means they have to be demined by 2025, which is going to be the challenge they have to work towards. And so basically, after having that, they call upon, they have their own mine action actors, but they also have international actors coming in and having different tasks. And that's how Apopo came into the country, being invited, but also, of course, being regulated and being accredited, even the rats, by this local authority. And so this is how it works. So it's really with the local authority that we work. Sometimes we do work with international organizations in certain countries, for example, with UNDP, because sometimes they have like a big demining project they work with the local authorities, but we as the mine action operator come in working with UNDP for that matter. So it really varies from the situation. It varies from a political situation as well in each country, because demining can be quite political as well. So it really depends on the situation, but roughly that's how it goes.
And a bit of a personal question. How did you find out about Apopo, and when did you decide, and why did you decide to join them?
It was almost a decade ago now, but I used to work I have a finance background, nothing to do with humanitarian work, nothing to do with that. And I used to work for Ashoka, so which probably most of you know, but which is a global network of social entrepreneurs. And they have what they call fellows, which are social entrepreneurs working on concrete solutions for kind of a better world and for impact. And the first ever task I had to do when I joined Ashoka 10 years ago was to organize a workshop to present the work of Apopo. And I remember really thinking that it was just an amazing innovation and a bit crazy as well. I really had to. I mean, when they first told me, okay, this person, they train rats to detect landmines, and I thought it was kind of crazy. But after hearing about the work, I just found it so innovative and amazing, and I was just craving impact really, and wanting something, greater. And when they started off the operations in Switzerland a year after that, then I knew I had to join.
Fantastic. Anna, we're going to end with the beginning. Could you tell us a little bit about the genesis of Apopo and what the founders have told you?
Of course. I mean, it started off 20 years ago with this crazy idea that rodents could actually be used for humanitarian purposes. It really started because they basically read a publication about the amazing sense of smell of gerbils. It was in the late 90s. And it was actually a thing that rodents could actually have an amazing sense of smell. And at the time, landmines were really high on the radar because it was just starting off as as something that we needed to tackle. Really, it was around the Ottawa Treaty, etc. And so basically the idea was, okay, which animals could we train, which rodents could we train to actually detect landmines? And the founder actually had rats when he was a kid, and he knew that they were very trainable, very social, very intelligent animals, something that we actually maybe don't project on rats, right? Because we think they are, you know, carrier of disease. I mean, we project all sorts of things, but they're actually very clean, very intelligent animal, and very trainable. That's very important. And so kind of putting those two things together, he thought, okay, I know I can train rats because they're very intelligent. I know normally they should have an amazing sense of smell. Could I actually train them to detect landmines? And at the time, they had University of Antwerp, because this person was Belgium, had a partnership with the University of Sokoine in Tanzania. And so they actually had a partnership to have the first rats from Tanzania, giant African rats, to detect landmines. That's how it started, with the first rat called Enzo, who could actually, detect landmines. It worked, basically, and it's been 20 years.
Very inspiring story. Thank you so much, Anna Bouchier from Apopo. Let's give her a round of applause. Can you hear that?
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna. So that wraps up our session on taking action in times of crisis. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much to our speakers for joining us and sharing their insights with us and with ChangeNOW. We heard there how actors big and small, from the UN to smaller social enterprises to private companies, can all work together to come up with solutions to the most pressing issues of our times. Thank you.